Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are delighted to share different stories about love and betrayal from around the world with you. So let's begin our story journey today. The sound of clinking glasses echoed through the banquet hall at the Bergen Seafood Group's annual meeting in Norway. Leif stood in the corner, holding a glass of sparkling water, his gaze scanning the crowd for his wife Sigrid. As an internationally renowned salmon farming expert, he was reluctant to attend such social gatherings. But tonight was an important event hosted by Sigrid as the company's vice president, and he couldn't miss it. Just then, a voice caught his attention. Seriously, you farming experts only know how to raise pale, tasteless fish in concrete pools. True gourmets only choose wild salmon. The voice came from a man wearing a tailored suit, surrounded by people responding with approving laughter. Leif recognized him. Viggo, that trendy restaurant chef who had recently been making waves on social media. What surprised Leif more was seeing Sigrid standing beside Viggo, smiling, her eyes not looking toward Leif, who stood just a few steps away. My husband happens to be an expert in this field, Sigrid said, still not looking at Leif. Perhaps you two should talk. Oh, Viggo raised an eyebrow, his tone contemptuous. Then I'd love to hear how he defends those antibiotic-injected seafood products. Anger rose in Leif's heart, but he chose to remain silent, only stepping forward. Leif, he introduced himself simply. Chief researcher at the Nordic Ecological Aquaculture Research Institute. Viggo's smile stiffened slightly, but quickly regained confidence. Viggo, head chef at Fjord Restaurant. We just received a Michelin star nomination. Congratulations, Leif said calmly. Though your comment about antibiotics is misleading. Modern ecological farming techniques have already. Theory is just theory, Viggo interrupted. I only trust the judgment of taste buds. Perhaps someday you should come to my restaurant to taste real wild salmon. Then you'll know the difference. As Leif prepared to rebut, Sigrid gently inserted herself into the conversation. Everyone, this is a night for celebration. Viggo, thank you for providing the food for our event tonight. Leif noticed the sparkle in his wife's eyes, that vitality he hadn't seen in a long time. In 30 years of marriage, he had never seen her look at another man that way. On the drive home that night, the car was unusually quiet. Sigrid focused on driving, while Leif gazed out at the dark fjord waters, reflecting on the encounter. Viggo's comments were completely unprofessional. Leif finally broke the silence. He knows nothing about the development of modern aquaculture. Sigrid sighed. He was just expressing his personal opinion, dear. And honestly, his cooking is truly outstanding. The company's partnership with his restaurant has greatly helped our international image. So that's why you allowed him to treat your husband that way? Because he's useful to the company? Leif, don't make a big deal out of nothing. It was just ordinary social conversation. Sigrid's tone carried a hint of impatience. You've been so sensitive lately. These words stung Leif. For the past 30 years, he had invested tremendous time developing more environmentally friendly farming techniques, striving to balance science, business, and environmental needs. Sigrid had always been his supporter, at least that's what he had always believed. Thinking back to the year they met, 1992 at the University of Oslo, young Leif was completing his doctoral thesis in marine biology, while Sigrid was studying international trade at the business school. The two met at a seminar on sustainable development and soon began a romantic campus relationship. Leif was attracted to her independent thinking and fearless spirit, while Sigrid admired his sincerity and scientific passion. They married the year after graduation and spent the next 30 years together through thick and thin. In his career, Leif wasn't solely focused on his research. Even during the busiest project periods, he always made sure to be involved in their children's growth. Every weekend, no matter how busy, he would take the whole family sailing in the fjord or hiking in the mountains. This tradition only gradually changed when the children grew up and left home to study and work abroad. Now, only the two of them remained at home. Their two children, Astrid and Eric, were developing their own careers in the UK and the US. Although they gathered every Christmas, most of the time, only Leif and Sigrid kept each other company in their large house by the fjord. Leif had always thought this tacit understanding was the cornerstone of their relationship, but now he began to doubt. In the following weeks, Leif noticed Sigrid's behavior becoming increasingly strange. She began working late frequently and often went out on weekends for important meetings. When he asked about these meetings, she was always vague, changing the subject to complain about the company's merger pressures and international market competition. One morning, Leaf noticed Sigrid's phone flashing with message alerts. She had just rushed into the bathroom, leaving her phone on the nightstand. In the past, there were no barriers between them, but lately Sigrid always kept her phone with her, even placing it beside her pillow while sleeping. Instinctively, Leaf glanced at the screen. Last night was perfect. See you next Tuesday? Same time and place. The sender was shown as V Project Contact. A cold premonition gripped Leaf's heart. He didn't touch the phone, but the message lingered in his mind. V Vigo? Same time and place. This didn't sound like a business meeting arrangement. Over the next few days, Leaf began to notice more details. Sigrid suddenly became more particular about her clothing, changed her perfume, and even enrolled in cooking classes. All changes that came after meeting Vigo. Whenever they had dinner together, she was always distracted, frequently checking her phone. And when Leaf talked about breakthroughs or concerns at work, her responses were noticeably more perfunctory than before. One Friday evening, Leaf was home alone and decided to prepare a romantic dinner for Sigrid's return. While browsing Instagram for inspiration, he stumbled upon Vigo's account. A photo caught his attention, Vigo with a woman in his restaurant kitchen, standing intimately together. Although the photo only captured the woman's profile, the blue scarf, Sigrid's favorite, was enough to make Leaf's heart sink. The caption read, "Spending wonderful time with a woman who truly understands food. Thanks for encouraging me to pursue pure flavors." Hashtags included real cuisine, wild salmon, road to Michelin, among others. Leaf's fingers weakly scrolled through the screen, discovering this wasn't the first such photo. Over the past few weeks, Vigo had frequently posted interactions with this food soulmate, though always cleverly avoiding frontal views. What shocked Leaf more was finding that Vigo had recently been heavily promoting his restaurants, Wild Salmon, on various food forums and blogs. As an industry expert, Leaf was well aware of how scarce genuine wild salmon resources were and how expensive they should be. Vigo's prices were too affordable, even for a high-end restaurant, which suggested something was definitely wrong. When Sigrid returned home that night, she found a cold, candlelit dinner on the table, with Leaf sitting in the darkness. "What's wrong?" she asked, putting down her briefcase. "You should have told me you were preparing dinner. Just like you should have told me about your developing relationship with Vigo." Leaf's voice was surprisingly calm. Sigrid's body visibly stiffened. Then she walked toward the kitchen with forced composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. I saw the photos on Instagram, Sigrid. More than one." She stopped, slowly turned around, her expression changing from shock to defensiveness. "It's just a work relationship. We're considering making him a brand ambassador for the company. Wearing your blue scarf in his private kitchen, posting photos about spending wonderful time together late at night." Leaf stood up. "I've known you for 30 years, Sigrid. Please don't insult my intelligence." After a long silence, Sigrid's shoulders slumped. "I don't know how to explain. How about starting with the truth?" "It's complicated, Leaf." She took a deep breath. "There's no passion between us anymore. Every day is the same life, the same conversations. You're immersed in your research, and you needed more excitement? So you chose to have an affair." Leaf's voice trembled with pain. "It's not entirely like that." Sigrid's eyes grew moist, but more from being caught than genuine remorse. "Vigo makes me feel seen, appreciated. He's passionate about life, not just data and research. So 30 years of marriage are just negated like that? My respect and support for you, the family we built together, all these can't compare to his few months of sweet talk." "Leaf, I didn't say these things aren't important, but you chose to betray them." Leaf felt an unprecedented calm descend, as if the storm in his heart had swept everything away, leaving only desolate tranquility. "Does he know you're married?" Sigrid silently nodded. "What else does he know? Our private life? My research? I never discussed your work." Sigrid quickly replied, her tone defensive. But Leaf had already seen that flash of hesitation in her eyes. As a long-term partner, he knew her every subtle expression too well. A terrible premonition struck him. "Tell me, Sigrid, is his so-called wild salmon really wild?" Sigrid avoided his gaze. "How would I know? I'm not a seafood expert. But you're the vice president of a seafood export company, with access to all supply chain information." Leaf's voice grew sharp. What did you give him, Sigrid? Besides yourself, we only discussed some general industry knowledge. She suddenly raised her voice. Don't turn this into a business conspiracy. Her voice lowered. It's just a relationship. Relationship. Leaf repeated the word as if it were a foreign language he couldn't understand. Well, I hope this relationship is worth the price you'll pay. He turned and walked toward the bedroom, beginning to pack his luggage. Where are you going? Sigrid followed behind, panic in her voice. I'll stay at the Institute's dormitory. Leaf answered mechanically. As for later, I need time to think. But one thing is clear. I won't continue living in a house full of lies. That night, snow began to cover Bergen's streets as Leaf drove away from the home they had shared for 30 years. On the long mountain road, his thoughts churned like a storm. It wasn't just the marital betrayal that broke his heart, but also the growing realization of another possibility. Sigrid might have leaked his years of research and insider industry information to Vigo. And this, perhaps, would be the key to his counterattack. In the days that followed, Sigrid repeatedly tried to contact Leaf. First came angry texts accusing him of overreacting, then emotional voicemails claiming she was just temporarily lost, and finally emails requesting to meet and talk. Leaf ignored them all. 30 years of trust had collapsed overnight, and no explanation could repair such betrayal. He found temporary accommodation in the laboratory at the Research Institute. It was a simple single dormitory with basic living facilities. Colleagues were curious about his sudden move, but tactfully avoided asking questions. Only his assistant Maya occasionally inquired about his condition. You look exhausted, Maya said one night when she found Leaf still working in the lab. Is something wrong? Leaf forced a smile. Just some personal issues. Don't worry. If you need any help, we're all here, Maya said sincerely. Leaf nodded gratefully. Though he chose not to share his marital crisis, his colleague's concern brought him a sense of warmth. At this difficult time, work became his only solace. He immersed himself in data analysis and experiments, trying to keep his thoughts away from the painful reality. A week later, Leaf received an unexpected call from his son Eric from America. Dad, what's going on? Mom says you two need some space, that you moved out? Leaf took a deep breath. He didn't want to involve the children in this storm, but didn't want to lie to them either. I discovered your mother is having a relationship with another man. There was silence on the other end of the line. This must be a misunderstanding. Mom wouldn't do that. I wish it were a misunderstanding, Eric. But the evidence is clear. What evidence? Maybe it's just a work relationship? You know, Mom has always been devoted to her work. Like I'm devoted to my research. Leaf laughed bitterly. Is that your mother's explanation? Another silence. She didn't exactly explain. She just said you two have some issues to resolve. Dad, whatever happened, you've been together for 30 years. There must be a way to solve this. Some betrayals can't be mended, Eric, Leaf said quietly. I've already contacted a lawyer. What? Wait, Dad, divorce? That's too sudden. At least talk more. Give each other a chance. I already gave 30 years of chance and trust. Leaf's voice was firm. I respect your concern for your mother, but this is a decision I must make. After hanging up, Leaf felt exhausted. This was just the beginning. He knew the coming days would be even more difficult. Not only would he have to deal with the breakdown of his marriage, but also face the confusion and incomprehension of his children. But he had made up his mind. He would not forgive this kind of betrayal, would not compromise his dignity for the sake of superficial peace. The Institute's laboratory became Leaf's sanctuary. In the following weeks, he immersed himself in work. As if only in microscopes and data could he find some sense of order. Colleagues tactfully avoided questions about his sudden move into the dormitory. Only his assistant Maya occasionally inquired about his condition. You should rest more, Maya said one night when she found Leaf still in the lab. Whatever has happened, exhausting yourself won't solve the problem. Leaf looked up with bloodshot eyes and managed a smile. Sometimes work is the best healing. But he wasn't just avoiding the issue. Beyond the pain, Leaf's scientific mind was constantly analyzing the holes in Vigo's wild salmon story. As an industry expert, he knew the numbers of truly wild salmon had drastically declined, making them prohibitively expensive. And the prices Fjord Restaurant offered were too affordable, even for a high-end establishment. More importantly, he accidentally discovered a key piece of information. In a casual conversation with a colleague who inspected imported seafood products, The colleague mentioned that several recent batches of salmon from Eastern Europe had tested positive for excessive antibiotics, but still entered the market through some special channels. This aroused Leaf's professional vigilance. Can you tell me more about these batches? Leaf asked. I don't know the specific details, his colleague answered. But I heard they were imported via the North Sea route, destined for several restaurants and hotels near Bergen. Though this kind of thing is common, you know, rich people always find ways around regulations. This information prompted Leaf to begin a systematic investigation. He first checked public import records, then contacted several old friends working at the Food Safety Authority to inquire about recent inspection reports. Although he didn't explicitly mention Vigo or Fjord Restaurant, the collected information gradually pointed in one direction. Someone was exploiting regulatory loopholes to sell low-quality farmed salmon as wild products. During this process, Leaf also noticed that Sigrid's company had recently established new partnerships with several Eastern European fish farms. As the vice president of a seafood export company, Sigrid was responsible for developing new markets and suppliers. These fragments began to form a disturbing pattern in Leaf's mind. Meanwhile, Sigrid continued trying to contact him, moving from initial anger to later requests and apologies. But each time, when he asked about her specific relationship with Vigo and the true source of their wild salmon, she always avoided answering or changed the subject. The issues between us have nothing to do with my work, she insisted during one call. Don't confuse these two things. But Leaf could no longer separate them. Betrayal was betrayal, whether in personal relationships or professional ethics. He informed Sigrid that he had consulted a lawyer and was preparing to initiate divorce proceedings. This is absurd. Sigrid almost shouted on the other end of the line. Ending 30 years of marriage over a little misunderstanding? Think about it calmly, Leaf. This isn't a misunderstanding, Sigrid, it's a choice. You chose to betray our marriage, and possibly your professional ethics as well. What are you accusing me of? Now you not only doubt my loyalty, but also my professional competence. Sigrid's voice was full of anger. Not doubt, Leaf said calmly. Just facing reality. After hanging up, Leaf decided to go further. After several days of investigation and reflection, he formulated a plan. As a scientist, he needed solid evidence. As a betrayed husband, he needed the truth. A week later, Leaf made a reservation at Fjord Restaurant as an ordinary customer. The restaurant's interior was designed to mimic the natural landscape of Norwegian fjords, with walls covered in photos of Vigo with various celebrities. Leaf noticed several pictures of Vigo and Sigrid at various events, standing close together, smiling intimately. These photos caused a twisting pain in his stomach, but he forced himself to focus on his real goal. He chose a corner seat and ordered the signature wild salmon set. This is our specialty, sir, the waiter proudly introduced. Wild salmon personally selected by Chef Vigo, prepared using traditional Norwegian cooking methods, served with seasonal vegetables and homemade sauce. Sounds wonderful, Leaf replied. May I ask where these salmon are caught? From the purest northern Norwegian fjords, sir. Freshly caught every morning and delivered directly to our kitchen. Leaf nodded and smiled, but mentally calculated the probability of such a claim. Wild salmon fishing in northern Norway was strictly limited, with scarce numbers and high costs. If Fjord Restaurant truly obtained such supplies daily, they would either be operating at a loss or had another source. When the dish was served, he saw Vigo personally walking out of the kitchen, interacting with customers in the restaurant. When Vigo's gaze swept across the room, he met Leaf's eyes, momentarily surprised before quickly regaining his professional smile and walking toward him. Mr. Leaf, what an unexpected surprise. Vigo's tone carried a hint of nervousness. I hope you enjoy our cuisine. I'm sure I will, Leaf calmly replied. I've always been curious about genuine wild salmon. Vigo's smile stiffened slightly, but he quickly regained his confidence. Then you'll definitely enjoy it. We only use the highest quality wild salmon, caught from the purest Norwegian fjords. Sounds impressive, Leaf smiled. By the way, who are your suppliers? We have our own exclusive channels. Vigo cleverly avoided a direct answer. Family connections with generations of fishermen. Quality guaranteed. Of course, Leaf nodded. I'm looking forward to tasting it. Vigo nodded somewhat nervously and left, while Leaf began his dinner. On the surface, he was an ordinary customer, but in reality, he carefully preserved a small sample of the fish. The dish was indeed excellent in presentation and flavor, but as a professional, Leaf immediately noticed several details. The texture of the meat, the distribution of fat, even the color all had subtle differences from genuine wild salmon. Years of research experience told him this was most likely farmed salmon, and of only average quality at that. After leaving the restaurant, Leaf immediately went to the university laboratory. Despite the late hour, he had around-the-clock access. He carefully placed the sample in analytical equipment and initiated a series of tests. The next morning, the results came in. This was absolutely farmed salmon, with antibiotic content nearly twice the EU standard. More worryingly, the detected type of antibiotic match varieties recently banned in Norway, but still legal in certain Eastern European countries. This discovery confirmed Leaf's suspicions. Vigo wasn't just deceiving consumers by selling farmed salmon as wild products, but was using fish that didn't meet Norwegian safety standards. And Sigrid, as an executive in a seafood export company, could not possibly be unaware. She was either directly involved in this fraud or chose to turn a blind eye. Either way, it violated her professional ethics. Over the next few days, Leaf began systematically collecting more evidence. He reviewed public import records, contacted friends in the industry, and even investigated Fjord Restaurant's supply chain through academic channels. The puzzle gradually came together. Vigo's wild salmon actually came from several low-cost Eastern European fish farms, where standards were far below Norwegian requirements. At the same time, he also gathered more information about Sigrid's relationship with Vigo. Through social media and personal networks, he learned their relationship had been going on for nearly 6 months, much longer than he had initially imagined. Even more shocking was his discovery that Sigrid's company had recently invested a considerable sum in Vigo's planned new restaurant project. These findings made the fire of anger in Leaf's heart burn hotter, but he chose to act calmly. As a scientist, he knew emotional reactions would only lead to poor judgment. What he needed was a systematic approach and solid evidence. After preparing all materials, Leaf contacted the Norwegian Food Safety Authority and consumer protection organizations, while also finding an investigative journalist he trusted. He carefully avoided directly mentioning Sigrid or her company, focusing only on Vigo's false advertising and food safety issues. "Why are you reporting this problem only now?" asked the Food Safety Authority official. "As a scientist, I need solid evidence before making accusations," Leaf replied. "And this isn't just about consumers being misled, but also potential health risks." When the investigative journalist asked why he was so concerned about this case, Leaf simply said, "As an aquaculture expert, I care about the industry's integrity and consumers' health. Any behavior that undermines these principles should be exposed." Meanwhile, Sigrid seemed to sense the changing winds. She suddenly contacted Leaf frequently, her tone shifting from previous anger to anxiety and pleading. "We really need to talk," she said in a voice message. "There are some things you may have misunderstood. Whatever you're planning, please discuss it with me first." But Leaf didn't respond. By now, he had crossed beyond the possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation. His only goal was to bring the truth to light. On an ordinary Wednesday morning, the storm broke. Several of Norway's largest media outlets simultaneously published investigative reports on Fjord Restaurant's wild salmon fraud. The reports detailed the true source of these salmon and the excessive antibiotics they contained, as well as potential health risks. These reports exploded like a bomb, causing a huge shock in the restaurant industry and among consumers. On social media, the hashtag FjordFraud hashtag quickly became a trending topic. Vigo's Instagram account was flooded with angry comments, while reporters and protesting consumers crowded outside Fjord Restaurant. Amidst this chaos, Leaf received an urgent text from Sigrid. "Do you know what you're doing? This was deliberate, wasn't it?" Leaf didn't reply. He knew the storm had only just begun. The next day, the Food Safety Authority announced a full investigation into Fjord Restaurant and temporarily suspended its business license. The Michelin Guide officially stated they were reassessing Fjord's star eligibility. Media investigations also began to expand to the supply chain. One reporter uncovered Sigrid's company's partnership with Eastern European fish farms and questioned these farms' environmental standards and product quality. Sigrid's name began appearing in major news reports, no longer as a successful corporate executive, but as a potential fraud participant. "You've ruined me," Sigrid called angrily that evening. "Do you know what this means for my career?" "I didn't mention you or your company," Leif replied calmly. "I only exposed the truth. If the truth hurts you, then the problem isn't with the truth, but with your actions. We could have resolved this issue privately. Why did you turn it into a public scandal? Like you resolved our marital problems privately? Through affairs and betrayal." Emotion finally seeped into Leif's voice. There was silence on the other end for a moment. "So this is revenge? Because of me and Vigo?" "This isn't revenge, Sigrid. It's responsibility. As a scientist, as a consumer, I have a responsibility to expose fraud and health risks. If you and Vigo had done nothing wrong, you wouldn't fear the truth. You'll regret this, Leif." Sigrid's voice was ice cold. "This isn't over yet." She hung up, leaving Leif alone in his small dormitory at the research institute. Though outwardly calm, his heart was churning. He knew he had embarked on an irreversible path, but he had no regrets. Some principles were more important than personal feelings, and integrity was one of them. The scope of the investigation continued to expand. Reporters uncovered more issues with Fjord Restaurant's supply chain, including suspicious import records and inspection certificates. Vigo tried to defend himself through social media, claiming he had been deceived by suppliers and knew nothing. But his excuses fell flat, especially when former employees came forward to testify that Vigo explicitly knew he was using farmed salmon rather than wild. Sigrid's company also fell into crisis. As a major shareholder and vice president responsible for the supply chain, she faced direct questioning from the board of directors. The company's stock price plummeted, clients began canceling contracts, and employees grew anxious. Just as the media storm seemed about to subside, a recording spread online. In it, a male voice that sounded very much like Vigo's and a female voice resembling Sigrid's discussed how to avoid quality inspections and how to use this salmon farming expert husband's reputation to endorse their products. "If anyone questions it, we'll say Leif approves of this practice too." "No one would doubt the husband of an industry expert," the female voice said. "Clever," the male voice replied. "That's why I like you, not just for your performance in bed." Both then laughed. The source of the recording was unknown, but its authenticity was quickly confirmed by experts. This recording spread rapidly on social media, becoming the final blow to the entire scandal. Leif was shocked by this recording. He had no part in releasing it, nor did he even know of its existence. Perhaps it was one of Vigo's disgruntled employees or someone within Sigrid's company. Either way, it completely destroyed Vigo and Sigrid's reputations. Vigo's restaurant eventually closed, with Michelin officially revoking his star rating and announcing his permanent disqualification from future evaluations. Sigrid was not only fired from her company, but also faced potential criminal investigation. Her once proud career collapsed overnight. This storm also drew widespread industry attention. Many media outlets approached Leif, hoping he would share his views on the future of aquaculture. Taking this opportunity, Leif published an academic paper on sustainable aquaculture, detailing a new ecological farming method that not only ensured fish health, but also significantly reduced environmental impact. After the paper's publication, representatives from the European Commission actively contacted Leif, expressing great interest in his research. After several rounds of discussion, they decided to trial his ecological farming method throughout the EU. This was a major breakthrough in Leif's career, representing recognition of his years of research. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings progressed smoothly with the assistance of lawyers. Sigrid initially tried to secure a larger property division, but her position softened after the recording incident. Eventually, they agreed to a relatively fair arrangement, ending 30 years of marriage. Throughout the process, Leif's attitude remained calm and resolute. When the lawyer asked if he had considered reconciliation, his answer was simple and clear. "Some betrayals cannot be forgiven. I would rather move forward alone than coexist with lies." The children were shocked and saddened by their parents' divorce, especially after learning the details of their mother's affair and commercial fraud. Initially, they tried to persuade Leif to reconsider, but soon accepted his decision. "I understand, Dad," Eric said during one call. "You did what you had to do. I just wish everything could have had a different ending." "Life rarely develops according to our wishes," Leif replied. but we can always choose how to face it. Months later, as media attention gradually subsided, Fjord Restaurant had closed, and Vigo's chef career was essentially over. Sigrid's company struggled through scandal and a series of lawsuits, eventually forced to file for bankruptcy protection. As for Sigrid herself, she faced criminal investigation for fraud involvement, her reputation in the business world completely destroyed. On a cold Sunday afternoon, Leif was handling files at the Research Institute when he suddenly received a notification from reception. Sigrid was in the waiting room. When he walked out of his office, he saw a haggard Sigrid. The once radiant woman now had sunken eyes and an exhausted expression. "It was you, wasn't it?" she asked directly. "You orchestrated all of this." Leif looked at her, feeling not the expected satisfaction or sense of revenge, only a profound weariness. "I only exposed the facts, Sigrid. If you're referring to the recording, that wasn't me. This was the truth." The appearance of the recording was a mystery to Leif as well, though he had his suspicions. "You destroyed me, Leif." Sigrid's voice was full of anger and accusation. 30 years of marriage, and this is how you take revenge? Just because of one mistake. Mistake. Leif's voice was calm but firm. An affair is not a momentary mistake, Sigrid. It's a series of conscious decisions, deciding to hide, deciding to deceive, deciding to betray. You not only betrayed our marriage, but also your professional ethics and public trust. You're always so self-righteous, as if you never make mistakes. Sigrid's voice rose, anger flashing in her eyes. "Do you know how much I've sacrificed for this family? How much I gave up to support your research and career? And then, just because of one slip-up, you destroyed my entire life." "I never asked you to sacrifice for me," Leif countered. "We were partners, at least that's what I always thought. And your current situation is the result of your own choices, not my revenge." "Oh, now you're going to pretend complete innocence." Sigrid laughed sarcastically. "Don't think I don't know who leaked that information to the media. Very convenient, isn't it? Getting revenge for my affair while posing as a defender of justice. Believe whatever version you imagine. If it makes you feel better." Leif turned to leave. "We have nothing more to say to each other." "Wait," Sigrid called after him, her voice suddenly softening. "Leif, look at me. 30 years. Is it really worth ending like this? I made a mistake, but we can fix this together. Start over." Leif turned around, looking at this woman who was once the center of his life. Although she now appeared vulnerable, with tears in her eyes, he could only see the traces of betrayal. "Some things, once broken, cannot be repaired," he said quietly. "Our marriage is one of them. You made your choice, and now I've made mine. You'll regret it." Sigrid's voice grew cold again. "When you lie alone in bed, thinking about our years together, you'll regret today's decision." "Perhaps," Leif admitted, "but I'd rather move forward with regret than walk alongside a betrayer. Goodbye, Sigrid." He didn't wait for her answer, walking back to his office and closing the door. Outside the window, the Norwegian winter sun broke through the clouds, shining on the snow-covered mountains. The fjord's water surface was calm as a mirror, reflecting the gray-blue sky. Leif recalled that summer 30 years ago when they first met, Sigrid's bright smile in the sunshine. That memory now seemed to come from another world, a world that no longer existed. He didn't deny the pain in his heart, but he knew it was a necessary price. Some principles couldn't be compromised, some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. The days ahead were not easy. In the quiet of night, loneliness would sometimes surge like a tide. But as time passed, the wounds began to heal. His research gained unprecedented recognition, and the European Commission's ecological farming project progressed smoothly. Maya was promoted to as senior research assistant, forming an efficient team that drove innovation in the aquaculture field. A year later, when Leif received notice of the European Commission's Sustainability Award, there was a quiet satisfaction in his heart. The same day, he received news about Sigrid. She had been sentenced to community service and fines for commercial fraud. Although she avoided imprisonment, her career was beyond salvage. As for Viggo, he had left Norway and was reportedly running an obscure small restaurant in some Eastern European country. His social media accounts had long stopped updating. The former celebrity chef's halo completely vanished. When signing the final divorce papers, Leif felt neither victory nor relief, only a calm certainty. Integrity would eventually be rewarded. and betrayal would ultimately bear its own fruit. In the cold Norwegian waters, this was an unchanging law of nature. He knew he would never forgive Sigurd's betrayal, but he no longer needed to dwell in pain. Life continued, the sea still flowed, and he was ready to embrace a new journey. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling content. We look forward to meeting you in our next story.